We start Masechet Succa by quoting the pasuk in Parshas Emor. That's before we learn the Mishnah. And the Torah tells us, "B'chamisha sayom l'chodesh hashvi," the seventh month, if we start counting from Nisan, is the month of Tishrei. And on the 15th day of Tishrei, Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yomim Lashem, 7 days. And after commanding us in the Daled Minim, the Torah says, "Basukos Teshu Shivas Yomim." So the first parak of this Masechet is focused on that command of Basukas Teshu Shivas Yomim. What are the laws of a sukkah? What constitutes a kosher sukkah? And what are the requirements? So it's very interesting that instead of giving us in a positive sense, the Mishnah tells us in a negative sense which sukkahs have to be avoided. So sukkah she gavoa lamala me'esrim amma, the airspace in the sukkah from the ground up to the schach is beyond 20 amma. Psula. And the Mishnah records a machlokas tanoim, according to the Tanakama of that Mishnah, this sukkah is disqualified because the schach is above 20 amma. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, and the Gemara is going to go into detail about this machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda holds that despite the height of the sukkah, the schach could be 40 amas, 50 amas high, it's kosher. Then the Mishnah goes on to mention another group of cases where everybody agrees that it's psula, the sukkah is disqualified. If the airspace from the ground until the schach is less than 10 tefachim, and by the way, this table is about 10 tefachim, so you can imagine that how small the sukkah is. Or alternatively, she'ein la shalosh defanos. It doesn't have 3 defanos. Now we're going to see in the sugya that you really don't need 3 defanos, 3 walls of the sukkah. You need 2 walls and a little bit of a third wall, not 3 full walls, but in this case, all he has is 2 walls. And the third psul is in the case of chama merupsa mitzilsa, which means if you look at the ground on a sunny day, what you're going to see is mostly light. You'll see very little shade. That's because he didn't put up enough schach to generate shade, psula. In all those cases, everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda, the sukkah is disqualified. Now, in the last case, as opposed to the first 2 cases of less than 10 tefachim or less than 3 defanos, which are going to be derived from special limudim, the third case is derived from svara, from logic. Rashi has a very odd kind of approach to the case of chamsa merupsa mitzilsa. If you take Rashi literally, Rashi says it's called bittul barov. The Torah says that if you have something that is the minority, it is overwhelmed by the majority. And it sounds like Rashi's holding that the small amount of schach that he put up on his sukkah is completely null and void. It's batal barov. But all the commentaries reinterpret this Rashi. You should not take it literally. Rashi doesn't really mean bittul barov. What Rashi really means is that if you look on the bottom of the sukkah, you will see that it's mostly sunny and there's very limited amount of shade. And that's called batal, meaning the Torah doesn't see in that schach that it really accomplished its goal to create sale. Okay, then. Let's start the Gemara. I just want to point out there are a couple of words here in Rashi. Again, if you have your own Gemara and you like to underline things, this is worth underlining. 4 lines down from the top of the page in Rashi, Rashi says, Al Shem Haschach Ruya Sukkah. The word sukkah itself means schach. Rashi has an equation, a new terminology, a new lexicon in which sukkah means schach. So let's keep that in mind. It's going to come up over and over again throughout the first parak of sukkah. Now, the Gemara is going to quote a Mishnah in Eruvin, Tnan Hasam. This is the first Mishnah in Eruvin, and the Gemara now is going to embark upon a study comparing the first Mishnah in Sukkah that we're learning with the first Mishnah in Eruvin. The first Mishnah in Eruvin is discussing the following case. So I'll need your eye contact here because this is an introduction that you have to have. It's a general introduction to Masechet Eruvin. You have chatzeros, which means a courtyard, an empty space, and many different dayarim, different households open up into a common courtyard. And then you have many different chatzeros that spill into a common mavui. That's called a mavui. Now, because the mavui is common to all these chatzeros, midrabanan, on a rabbinic level, they treated it as a rishus harabim. So if you want to carry first from your chatzer into the mavui on Shabbos, or from the mavui into your chatzer, it's as if you're carrying from a private domain into a public domain. That's only rabbinic. On a doraisa level, a mavui is a full-fledged rishus hayachid. Why? Because the mavui has 3 mechitzos, and that's enough according to Torah law. But because it's open to the public and people are converging on this area called the mavui from all the different various chatzeros, the Rabbanan said it looks a little bit like and it's reminiscent of a rishus harabim. We're going to treat it as a rishus harabim. And that has a twofold nafkamina. Number one, you're not allowed to carry from your house through the chotzer into the mavui, because that would be equivalent midrabanan of taking something on Shabbos from a rishus hayachid to rishus harabim. And again, the reverse is also true. You're not allowed to carry something from a mavui into your house through the chotzer. And secondly, you're not allowed to carry 4 amos inside the mavui, because the mavui itself is now given the status of a rishus harabim. What do you do in a case of a mavui? People want to use the mavui to carry in the mavui or to carry from the mavui into their homes, respectively, or into the chotzer. So we need what's called a heter, lechi, o korah. There are 2 options. One is a lechi, which means, as we said before, the mavui is surrounded on 3 sides by mechitzos. There's one side that's absolutely open, which means you go from the public thoroughfare that is surrounding into the mavui. At that opening, you have 2 options to be matir tiltul in the mavui. We make the following. Number one, we have a lechi. A lechi is a vertical pole that stands on the right side as you enter into the mavui. Another option is what's called a korah. A korah is a horizontal pole that goes from one kosel to the other kosel. It's actually sitting on both sides of the kosel. And we're going to have a machlokus now. What's the maximum height that you can set up your mavui? Mavui here means your korah. And the Mishnah says the following: mavui shehu gavar me esrim am. The word mavui here refers to the korah, which is very often called a mavui. And if he left a korah going across the 2 solim, the 2 kosle mavui, and it was above esrim am, yemayit, he must lower the korah. Otherwise, he cannot carry in the mavui or from the chatzar into the mavui. So that, notice the Mishnah in Eruvin used the word yemayit. It's already giving us sort of a recommendation how you could salvage the situation and improve it by lowering the korah. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ein Tzarach. Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't need it. I don't care how high the korah is. It could be higher than esrimam from the ground. And this machlokas recorded in the beginning of Eruvin about the height of the korah is identical with the machlokas recorded here at the beginning of Succa with regard to the height of the schach. So the Gemara now asks the following question: Ma'ishno l'gabi Succa, did Tani psula, when the Mishnah wants to disqualify a schach that's above 20 amma, it used the word psula, it's disqualified. U'ma'ishno gabi mavui, did Tani takanta. In the case of the mavui, the Mishnah doesn't say it's disqualified because it's above 20 amma. It tells you exactly what to do: lower the korah.
In order to lower the sky.
Well, there are a number of ways of actually lowering schach, and we're going to see that as we go along. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but you could raise the ground, and you can. It depends whether the tefanos reach all the way up to the schach. There are many different options. So the Gemara says the following. This is the first answer of 2 answers. Succa d'oraisa, and therefore Tani psula. Mavui d'Rabbanan, Tani takanta. And Rashi explains the following. We have a shear of Succa, the dimensions of the Succa, and that was learned at Sinai. And therefore, that's a d'oraisa. The Torah says psula And therefore, the Mishnah, reflecting the fact that already at Har Sinai we knew, and we derived the psul of a sukkah that's lamala mi'esrim amma. That's what the word psula means. So psula really is referring to the past history, going back to Har Sinai. But we couldn't use the word psula in the case of a mavi. Why? Because on a deraisa level, as we indicated earlier, the mavi is a full-fledged Rosh Hashanah, and you're allowed to carry the mavi from the mavi into the chatzah, because it has 3 mechitzos, and that's enough deraisa to set up Rosh Hashanah. There are abundant possible. So I can't use the word psula, indicating that in the past it was already possible, and now in the Mishnah in Eruvin, we're establishing for the first time, you heard it for the first time, that a mavi is asur, you can't be metaltal, unless you set up a valid korah. So therefore, Tani Takanta, the Mishnah is going to tell you, well, you want to carry in the mavi, or from the mavi into the chatzir. Here's what you have to do. You have to lower the korah so it's less than 20 am. Ibra is saying the Gemara offers another answer. Bidoraisa nami Tani Takanta, even in the case of a psul doraisa that was given in Har Sinai, like a sukkah l'malam yesrim the Torah, already possible, but yet the Rabbanon, when they formulated the Mishnah, they could have used the word possible, but that wouldn't have been sufficient. Why? Because as we learned in our Mishnah, there are a whole list of invalid sukkahs here. And the sukkah, the nafesh milayu, since there's a whole long list, if it would tani takanta, then to remedy the situation, it would have to go into great detail. For example, in the case of schach that's above Esrim Amma, we would have to lower the schach. In the case of a sukkah that's less than 10 tefachim high, you would have to raise the schach. In the case where he has only 2 defanos instead of 3 defanos, the bishop would have to tell us that he's got to add a 4th dofer. And in a case where there's too much chama and not enough tzel, the bishop would have to tell me, well, you have to add more schach to set up the tzel. Now we have a rule. This is based on a Gemara at the beginning of Sachin, that li'olam yeshana adam l'talmid of derech tzara. We try to be as short and as quick as possible. So therefore, pasuk v'tani psula. The Mishnah uses one word, which really indicates why all the others are possible. But in the case of mavui, lo nafish milah, there's only one word that was necessary in the Mishnah in mavui. And that is Yomi, lower the korah. That's all the Mishnah has to say. There are no other psulim that are listed in the Mishnah. Now the Gemara asks me, thank you so much. What is the source for the psul of L'mayla Mi'esrim Amma? And here the Gemara is going to record a 3-way machlokas. We're going to start with Rabbah. Omar Rabbah, the Omar Kra, the Torah says, with regard to the mitzvah, and the reason for the mitzvah of Sukkah in Parshas Emor, L'man yedu dorosechem, you should know and be aware, ki b'sukkos o shavtis b'nei Yisrael. And the word sukkos means schach, as we saw in Rashi. That was the Rashi yesterday on the wall. So therefore, you have to be aware of the schach. And Rabbah explains, ad esrim amma, if the schach is up to but not beyond 20 amma high, adam yodeh shudar b'sukkah. His eye looks towards the top, and he sees the schach, and he sees that the schach is there, and he's makayim his mitzvah of l'man yedu. He's aware of the sukkahs. However, l'mayla me'esrim amma, imagine you have something very, very high. Ein adam yodea shedar b'sukkah. He's not even aware of the fact that he's inside the sukkah. He doesn't stretch his neck back, and lift his nose, in such a way that his eyes will reach all the way on top and see something that's a height of above Esrim Amma. Mishum dol sholto be'ena. Now, it doesn't mean it's impossible for him to see the schach. He could see the schach, but it requires a little bit of an extra effort on his part. And we want to make it a sukkah which is obvious. It's sort of like in his face, so to speak. He sees it in his eyes, and that's true if it's up to but not beyond Esrim Amma. That's the opinion of Rabbah. And the Torah Tamim is very famous for saying that when the brothers pushed Yosef into the bar, the bar was more than Esrim Amma, and they didn't take the effort to look to see whether there were kravim inside the bar. Anyway, a similar halacha to this, by the way, we'll see in Hanukkah, but if you put your Hanukkah above 20 Amma, and people don't see it, and you're not makayim the mitzvah Pirsum Hanes. Rabbi Zera Omar, Mehach, the source for the psul of a sukkah of Al Esrim is a pasuk in Yeshayahu Nov, in which Yeshayahu is foretelling, prophesizing the Achris Hayomim, the end of days. And he says, V'sukkah tia l'tzel yoma mechoref. What is the purpose of a sukkah? It's to create tzel from choref. Choref means on a very hot, sunny day, and the sun is beating down upon you. God will put us all in the future redemption into a sukkah, and that sukkah will protect us by giving us shade from the sharav, from the chom, from the heat. And sukkah means schach, as we said before. Again, we come back to the Rashi. And schach has to give you tzel. Are you sitting in the tzel? Says Rabbi Zera, ad esrim amma. If the schach is within, but not beyond the esrim amma, adam yoshev b'tzel sukkah, then you could say that when he's sitting in the sukkah, he's getting some benefit from the schach, even though it's very high, but it's blocking out the sun. Well, if the distance, the height from the ground level up until the schach is more than 20 hours, ain't on them yoshev b'tzel sukkah, el b'tzel defanos. What's really giving him shade is not the schach. The schach is way up there. The sun is going to beat down. It's going to hit the sides, the walls of his sukkah. And in a sense, the tzel of one dofen is going to overlap with the tzel of another dofen. And basically what you're going to be sitting in is the tzel, not of the schach, but rather the tzel of the defanos. Amalei Abaye objects to Rav Zera. He says, Alamayata, ha'ose sukasa be'ashtaros karnayim, ha'chinami delavi sukkah. What happens in a case where you have two gigantic mountains with a valley in between? He sets up his sukkah on the bottom of the valley between the two gigantic mountains. And then his shade is not coming from the schach, but rather from the mountains on his right and on his left. They're so tall that the sun is hitting the mountains, and that's creating the tzel on the bottom. It's not that he's sitting in the tzel of the schach, he's sitting in the tzel of the mountains. And it was obvious to Abaye that a person could build a sukkah anywhere on the face of the globe, as long as he fulfills the requirements of the sukkah. Later, Zera responds in self-defense against Abaye. There, in the case of Ashtaros Karnayim, Dal Ashtaros Karnayim, let's imagine that the mountains were not there. Let's just focus our attention on the sukkah and the schach. Ika tzel sukkah. There would be tzel sukkah. So as far as the sukkah itself is concerned, the schach, which is below 20 amas, would give me tzel. Lamaisa, in reality, I'm getting tzel from the mountains. But it doesn't matter because the schach per se inherently would give me schach. It just happens to be located in a place where there's tzel coming from the mountains. But hacha, in the case of our Mishnah, where he sets up his schach 20 amas above ground level, then dal defanos lekatzel sukkah. Even if you take away the defanos, the sukkah and the schach does not really provide shade. It's too high up. And according to Abzera, the psul has to be in the schach. And now we go on to the third answer to the question, why is a sukkah l'mala me'esrim amma psula? Rava Omar me'hacha. The Torah says in Parshas Emor, in the Parsha of Sukkah that we began with today, Basukos Teshru Shivas Yomin. The sukkah is meant to be a temporary dwelling, a place to dwell in for 7 days. Amra Torah, Kol Shivas Yomim say, during a 7-day week period, you should leave Diras Keva, your permanent dwelling place, B'Shev, and rather you should dwell B'Diras Haroy in a temporary sukkah. A sukkah that's Haroy only for 7 days, which means that its mechitzos are very light. Now, Ades from Amma, what would you do if you had your schach, your roof is above 20 amma? If it's below 20 amma, Adam also diras haroy. he doesn't need the strongest mechitzos to hold the schach. But if it's lamala me'esrimam, if the schach is so high up, then flimsy walls, temporary walls, will not be able to hold up the schach. Ein adam osa dirasa diras aroyal diras keva. What he's going to have to do is he's going to have to bring very strong mechitzos that are permanent in nature in order to guarantee that the schach doesn't fall. So Amalei Abai, again, Abai comes with his objection before to Rabzeira, now to Rava. Elameata, if your logic is correct, then asa mechitzos shel barza. If he makes his mechitzos out of iron and a steel, v'sichech al gavon, and he puts the schach on top of the mechitzos shel barza, is hachinami de lo avi sukkah. He built himself a diras keva. I'll prove it to you because you said the reason why it's a diras keva and it's possible in lamal ne'esr is because you need, in order to hold up the schach that's so high, real strong mechitzos. What if I have my schach below 20 amot, but I build my walls out of steel? In that case, I've made myself a diras keva, and it should be possible. And once again, it was Pashat Abaye. We never found anywhere in halacha that there are limitations on what the material of the tfanas is made out. On Malay, so Rava says in response to Abaye's objection, this is what I had in mind when I said that ad esrim ama de adam osa diraso diras aroy. And what I meant to say was that up to 20 amma, he could make his dira into a diras aroy. He overlay diras keva, not enough. I never said that he has to make a diras keva. If he makes it a diras keva with very strong mechitzas made of steel, like a diras keva, then okay, he wants to live there for 7 days. He's living there on a temporary basis as if it were a diras aroy. That's fine. So that's a sukkah kshera. The Torah didn't say that he has to have a sukkahs aroy. The Torah is just setting up a shear. And the Torah is telling me that Lamalam Esrim Amma, if his schach is above Esrim Amma, Odom Osa Diraso Diras Keva, because of the height of his sukkah, he's definitely going to make it into a Diras Keva. And therefore, Ki Ovid Lei Diras Aroy, even if we would use very flimsy mechitzos that are fly by night, that could be blown away by the wind, and there's certainly a Diras Aroy, Nami Lo Nafik, he would not fulfill its obligation. So that in a case where he decides, not because of the schach, but he wants to build the fanos out of barzel, out of steel, out of iron, and he makes himself a diras keva, but he has schach that's kosher. The schach is within esrim alma, and within the category of a diras keva, you also have a diras aroy, which means he only intends to live there for a week, and then he's yotze. But if on the other hand, he puts his schach in a way that he has to build his sukkah as a diras keva, because a diras haroy in that case will not hold up his schach. It's so high up. That is low nafik. He's not. Now we're going to start our phase Amid Bays. Let's just review 3 different approaches, 3 different explanations as to why a sukkah is psula if it's above 20 amma. Number 1, we have Rabbah. Rabbah says that he's not aware of the schach, and therefore it's not leman yedu dorosechem. Rabbi Zera says because the sail on the bottom of the sukkah is not coming, it's not being afforded by the schach that's too high up, it's coming from the tfanos. And we have Rava who says that it's going to have to be a diras keva. He has no choice, but in order to hold up the schach that's so high, he must make it into a diras keva. So the Gemara points out here, Kulu, all of these 3 shitos, and so now the Gemara is going to analyze why each one of these Amoraim rejected the other. So Karabalo Amri. Let's understand first why, let's say, Rab Zera and Rava rejected Rabbah of Laman Yedu Dorosei. That pasuk is Yediyah Lidorosi. It's not telling you something about your sukkah and what mentality and what mindset you have when you sit in the sukkah. It's telling you that the ultimate goal over the course of all of Jewish history of setting up a sukkah and having the Jewish nation sit in the sukkah is Lavan Yedu. But it doesn't give you halachas about Ploni Almoni who's sitting in the sukkah that he has to be aware that he's sitting in under the schach. Laman Yedu Dorosei. It's telling you that the enterprise, the divine mitzvah of sukkah was created for the purpose over the generations of Lavan Yedu to remember. And Rashi here, 3 lines down from the top, says, Hekev Sukkahs Anani Akovid, which is very strange. Rashi is reflecting the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer against Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that what the purpose of the mitzvah of Sukkah is to remember the Anani Akovod. You know, in our Sukkah, we have pictures on the wall of Anani Akovod. But there is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. He disagrees. He says it's Sukkah's Mamish, that during the period of 40 years in the wilderness, they sat in real structures, real booths, physical booths. But Rashi, for some reason, chooses to go with the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer of, sorry, I have to just try to mute this if I can. I don't know. Wasn't able to do this. But in any event, that's why both Rabbi Zera and Rava rejected Rava. And now the Gemara wants to know, why did they reject Rabbi Zera? Meaning, why did Rava and Rava reject Rabbi Zera? Rabbi Zera nami lo amri. Why? Because Rabbi Zera built himself on a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi that predicts the Achris Hayomim, the Sukkah Tiel Itzel, and he derived from that pasuk the conclusion that a Sukkah has to be royal itself. Ahuli Mos HaMashiach U'Biksid. We cannot derive any halachas in Sukkah and requirements based on what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was promising the tzaddikim at the time of Yemot HaMashiach, that they will sit under the shade and enjoy the benefits of the sale of a sukkah. So the Gemara immediately asks Rabbi Zera, why does he think he can derive halachas from Yeshayahu's prophecy and the vision of what's going to happen b'achris hayom? And the answer is, in Cain, if the Torah was only interested in Yemos HaMashiach, then Lema Kra, the pasuk didn't have to use the word sukkah. It could have said v'chuppah tiel itzel yom. When you want to talk about being covered and protected, you usually use the biblical term that's appropriate is chuppah. Chuppah surrounds you and protects you overhead. My sukkah tiel itzel yom. Why did the Torah go out of its way to choose the word sukkah instead of chuppah? In addition to teaching me about the tzaddikim at the time of Mashiach and the vision of Yeshayahu, he's also telling me halach in sukkah that a sukkah has to be litzel, and if it's above Esrim Amma, then you're not sitting in the tzel of the schach, you're sitting in the tzel of the defana. Rava nami lo amri. Why didn't Rava and Reb Zera accept the approach of Rava, who says that the sukkah's teishu shivas yom means got to be a diras aroy, and once the sukkah is so high up, you're going to have to make it into a diras keva with very strong, powerful tefanos. Mishum kushya d'Abaye. They had the same question, the objection of Abaye, that according to Rava, it would come out that if I built a sukkah out of steel, permanent tefanos, then I would be invalidating my sukkah, and that's not true. Okay. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, as recorded at Mishnah, in the case of the schach that's lamala mi esrim am. Kiman azla hadi omer Rabbi Yoshia omer Rav. We're going to now quote a tradition in the name of Rav about the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham and Mishnah. We'll see it in just a minute. And Kiman Azla means the Gemara wants to know if Rav is reflecting one of the 3 shitas that we have, whether it's Rabba, Rabbi Zera, Rava, as to why Lamala Mi'esrimam is Psula. But first, let's understand the statement of Rav, and then we'll analyze Rav in the light of those 3 shitas that we've been learning. Rav says that machlokes When does the Mishnah record a machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim regarding Lamala Me'esrim Amah? That's b'she'ein Tefanos Magias L'Schach. When the Tefanos don't reach all the way to the Schach, there's airspace between the top of the Tefanos and the Schach. And Afilu Lamala Me'esrim Amah Kshera. If the Tefanos are Magios L'Schach, Aval, that's the key word Aval here, in a scenario in which the Tefanos go all the way up to the Schach, and there's no airspace, then Afilu Lamala Me'esrim Amah, even according to the Chachamim Shita, Kshera, we can be machshir the Sukkah, even though the Schach is above Esrim Amah. The Gemara says, Keman, you could only understand Rav in the light of the sheet of Rabbah, the Omar, Mishum de lo Sholta Ba'ena, the Keva, the Defanos Magis Schach, Mishlat Shola Ba'ena. What happens is that when you look at the walls that surround you, the Defanos of the Sukkah, your eye travels up the Defanos, and then you see the Schach. The problem that the Chachamim raise, and their objection in the case of Lamala Me'esrim, is because Einat Fanas Magias L'Schach. So the Fanas at some point terminate, and then there's airspace. He doesn't bother picking up his head to see the Schach that's above Esrim Am. But if, on the other hand, the Fanos reach all the way up to the Schach, then even if the Schach is above Esrim Am, the Rabbanan will say that the Sukkah is Kshera, because then through the Tefanos, his eye rises up to see the Schach, and that's called Sholta Ba'ena. Now the Gemara asks the following question. Kiman Azla, according to which of the three Shitos, in explaining the Psul Lamala Me'esrim, would we reflect another tradition in the name of Rav? Ha Diyamar Rav Huda Amar Rav, Machlokes, the Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim, in a sukkah that's above Esrim Amah, is only b'she'ein ba ela arba al arba amos. It's only referring to a sukkah, the dimensions of which are exactly 4 by 4 amos. The width and the length are 4 amos. Aval yesh ba yoser mi arba amos al arba amos. If it's a larger sukkah, then even the Chachamim would concede that afilu l'mal me'esrim amah kshera, that the sukkah is kshera even if it's above Esrim Amah. What's the logic here? That if the shetach, if the area of the sukkah is much larger, even the Rabbanan can accept and validate a sukkah l'mal me'esrim. Kiman ki Rabbi Zera. This reflects the sheet of Rabbi Zera, the Yom Mishum Tzelhu, that the reason why l'mal me'esrim Amah is possible is because you're not sitting in the tzel of the schach. And now we understand Rav's shita. Cave under Revicha, since the sukkah, if it's larger than Arba al-Arba Amos, it's very large, that's called Revicha, there's a lot of Revach, Meruvachas, then Ika Tzel Sukkah. There'll be a tzel coming from the Schach down into the sukkah, even if it's above Esrim Amah, because you have such a large area, and even the Chacham would concede in such a case that the sukkah is Kshera. And Tosfos, Dibra Maskal Yesh, is going to try to set up a ratio between the size of the sukkah and the height of the schach, because you could have a sukkah that's very, very high up. It's even 30 amas, 40 amas high. It's only 4 amas and a little bit. So you're going to have a ratio. Comes up with a ratio of 1 to 5. In any event, if the psul of Lamala Me'esrim was because Ein Ha'ayin Shaletes, or because it's a Diras Keva, not a Diras Haroy, it would make no difference whatsoever what the size of the dimensions of the sukkah. So Rav, in his comment that even the Rabbanan Amodeh, that Lamala Me'esrim is Kshera in a case of a large sukkah, could only be reflected in the sheet of Rabbi Zera of Tzel, that if the sukkah is very large, you can get Tzel even from a higher schach. And now we have a third tradition in the name of Rav, that again limits the scope of the Machlok Shim Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham. Keman Azla, which of the three shitas about Gemara Amoraim is reflected in the statement of Had Yomer of Chanan Bar Rabba Omer Rav, Machlokes she'ena machzekes ela kidei rosho verubo v'shulchano. This is what's called a sukkah ketana, a very small minimum size sukkah. It only has the space for one person to, and not even for his whole body. His head could go into the sukkah. Most of his body could go into the sukkah, not all of it. And he has a little tiny table that goes into his sukkah. I once was in Europe. They had a fair, and they actually showed you how they weren't teaching the laws of sukkah. These were going in Italy, but they were showing you how you could expand. You could use your space to its maximum. So they show you. You could see something similar in IKEA if you've ever gone to IKEA. They have these booths where they show you how to maximize space. It's really cute. It's like a dollhouse. And he says that a dollhouse, which is enough of Kidei Rocho, Rubo, Shulchano, is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, meaning a human body can take up what's called an amma by 1 amma, which is 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim. You need another tefach for the shulchan. Imagine a shulchan that's only a tefach. It's literally a dollhouse. But in that case, the Chachamim say that if the schach is so high up and your sukkah is so small, then it's possible. Avol machzekes yoser mi kidei rosh haveruv v'shulchano. Then the Chachamim would agree, they would concede that afil l'malam esrim amma kshera, that the sukkah is kshera even above esrim amma kiman. How do you make sense out of that statement? And therefore is the lo kechad. It doesn't reflect any of the 3 shittas. No matter what shita you have, it's not going to work out. And if the psul is because you don't see the schach, what difference it makes if it's more than 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim? You're not going to see the schach. If you talk about shade, then if you have a very small sukkah, for sure you're not going to get much shade from schach that's above. And if you talk about a diras keva, what difference it make how small the sukkah is? Now, the Rishonim, we don't have time for this, but they go into great detail that according to the statement of Rav Hanan that we're learning now in the name of Rav, what is the reason why L'mala B'Esrim Am is possible? And therefore, if it's got the dimensions of 7 by 7 tefachim, the Chachamim passel the sukkah, but if it's larger than that, they wrong. And Tosfos comes up with a shita, that's this Tosfos Dira Maskel Avol, that it's kilul shel parnagol. It's like you've made it into a chicken coop. It's so small, and the schach is so high. Anyway, so the Gemara now says, Bishlema de Rabbi Yoshia Fliga ad Rav Huna. The Gemara says there's no doubt about it that Rav Oshia, who says that the Chachamim are moder, all this is in the name of Rav, that if the Defanos reach the schach, then the Chacham agree that it's kosher, is pliga ad Rav Huna ve'al Rav Chanan Barav. They certainly, meaning Rav Oshia, certainly rejects both Rav Huna, who says that the Chachamim are moder in the case where it's wider than 4 by 4 amos, and according to Rav Chanan, who says the Chachamim are moder in a sukkah that's wider than 7 by 7 tefachim, inu, both Rav Huna and Rav Chanan, koyavi shi'ura lemishkan. They set up a shear for the length of the sukkah, and the machlokes Chacham Rav Yehuda is in that shear. Ve'iu, but he Rav Oshia lo koyav shi'ura b'mishkan. He's not giving a shear in the orach, and therefore he holds that even a sukkah ketana, which is either 4 by 4 amos or 7 tefachim, there is no machlokes between Chachamim and Rav Yehuda if the tefanos reach all the way up to the schach. El Rav Huna v'Rav Chanan bar Rabba, according to both of them, that they gave a shear to the Aruch HaSukkah, whether it's 4 by 4 amos or 7 by 7 tefachim. Nema behechsher sukkah kamiflagi. Shall we assume now that they are arguing simply about the minimum size of a sukkah, the smallest sukkah? They both agree that the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim only applies to a sukkah gedolah. But what is a sukkah gedolah and what is a sukkah ketana? This is the machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chanan. Demar, according to Rav Huna, savar hechsher sukkah, the minimum size of a sukkah is arba amos, and that's going to be the sheet of Rav that we'll get to on Daf Gimel. Whereas Mar savar Rav Chanan holds hechsher sukkah b'machzekes rosho v'ruba v'shulchana. which means 7 by 7 tefachim. So the machlokas between Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda could only be if it's more than that shear. And if it's less than that shear, then even Rabbi Yehuda would have to agree that the sukkah is psula because it's too small. The Gemara says, lo. The Kuli Alma, both Rav Huna and Rav Hanan agree that Hechsher sukkah, all you need for a minimum shear of a sukkah is Rosh Hamerubav Shulchano, is 7 by 7 tefachim. V'hacha miflagi. What is the machlokus between Rav Hanan and Rav Huna? The Mar Savar, according to Rav Hanan, the Masechet Rosh Hamerubav Shulchano pligi. The machlokus between Chacham and Rav Yehuda only applies in the case of the barest minimum size sukkah, which is 7 by 7 tefachim. Aval Yoser may Rosh Hamerubav Shulchano, if it's more than 7 by 7 tefachim. Divrei Hakol Kshera. Again, we don't know why the Chachamim passel a sukkah gvah me'asara if it's only a minimum. Again, as we said earlier, we don't have a logical reason for that. Umar Savar, Rav Huna is of the opinion that if the sukkah is 20 amos high and its width is Rosh Hamerubav Shulchano ad arba al arba amos, pligi, there's the machlokas between Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda. And in a Yoser me'arba amos, divrei hakol kshera, because the reason the Chacham pasel is sukkah above Esrim Amma is because he's not sitting in the tzel of a sukkah. But if the sukkah is very wide and it's more than a 4 by 4 amma sukkah, then he will be sitting in the tzel of the sukkah. The Gemara now raises a kasha, an objection on Rav Huna and Rav Hanan, who explained that the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon is only in a sukkah ketana, which according to Rav Huna is 4 by 4 amos, according to Rav Hanan is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. Basically, how could we reconcile the following brisa with Rav Huna and Rav Hanan? Sukkah shigavol l'mala mi'esrim amo psula, Rav Yehuda machshir ad arba v'chamishim amo. It could be as high as 40 or 50 amo. The Mefarshim say it could even be higher than that. And Rabbi Yehuda proves. What's his proof? Ma'aseh be'eleni amalka belot. Heleni was the malka, and the Chachamim used to visit her sukkah on sukkah. She would be the hostess. And her sukkah, it was above Esrim Amma, and the Chachamim, they never raised a voice of objection. They were fine with the sukkah that was above Esrim Amma. Amrulo, so the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, "V'chi bisham raya, you have a proof from Eleni Amalka. She doesn't have an obligation to sukkah." So the Chachamim did not object to the fact that she had a sukkah that was so high, it was above Esrim Amma. They agree that this sukkah is psula, but they don't care if a woman sits in the sukkah. She's not obligated in the midst of sukkah. Amalehem, Rabbi Yehuda turns to the Chachamim, and he says, "Hello, Shiva Banamoyu." She had 7 sons, and presumably some of them were bar mitzvah, and even those who were young in the bar mitzvah, she had a mitzvah chinuch, and she was obligated to put them into a sukkah kshera. So why did the Chacham object on the level that her sons were sitting in that sukkah? And furthermore, says Rabbi Yehuda, the od kol masel lo asa el al pi Chachamim. It's for sure that she would not build a sukkah that was against the minimum shear and the rulings of the Chacham Kedasu Kedid. So we have a proof from this story of Hileni Amalka that a sukkah above Esrim Amma is kshera. Now, before the Gemara explains what the kasha is on Rav Huna and Rav Hanan, the Gemara tries to analyze the brisa. Lama lila misni the od kol maselo asa el pi chachamim. Why is it enough that she said, "For my 7 sons, I have to set up a sukkah kshera"? What was the point in formulating this rule that kol maselo asa el pi chachamim? What did that add? Hachikam. This is what Rabbi Yehuda was telling the Chacham. He, Tomer, maybe he'll say that the children of Hileni Amalka were very, very young, and even though she had 7 children, the oldest was not bar mitzvah, is Banim Ketanim are you, and therefore they didn't make any objection because Ketanim P'turim bin Sukkah, and we're going to have to assume that from the time that the Ketanim reached the age of chinuch, let's say the age of chinuch is 7 or 8 years old, whatever it might be, then certainly she would have to, according to Yoshita Chacham, make a sukkah that's kshera for the mitzvah of chinuch. You can't put a child who's royal chinuch into a puzzle of sukkah. A lot of people buy a lemon or an esrog for a child. That's not halachically valid. I mean, if the child is 3 years old, that's fine. But if he's a year lechinuch, you have to give him a esrog, not a lemon. Came in the shiva, hayula. She had 7 sons. The law is that a child who can be independent of his mother is chayav in the mitzvah of sukkah within the framework of chinuch. And if she had 7 sons, then there's no question about it that the oldest of the 7 was already a royal of chinuch, and he was in the getter of eno tzarch le'imo. The chi tamer, but if you'll argue katan she'eno tzarch le'imo, even if the katan is independent of his mother, let's say he's 7 years old, whatever it is, and he's chayiv in sukkah b'drabanan, but it's only drabanan, is maybe iu b'drabanan lo mishkecha. Maybe Heleni Amalka was not careful in a drabanan, and the chachamim knew that she didn't have any peda to make sure that on a drabanan level there would be a sukkah kshera, so they let it go by. But Toshma, but the old kol masel lo asel api chachamim. Certainly, she was makbid even on a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And if this sukkah would be psula, as the chachamim argue, says Rabbi Yehuda, then the chachamim of Hileni Amalka who went into the sukkah, they should have notified her that she should not be bringing her sons who are Einit Tzarch Le'imo and they're included in chinuch into such a sukkah. And they were silent. It means that if they didn't protest, they accepted that this sukkah, even though it's above Esr Mama, is kshera. The Gemara explains, this proof of Rabbi Yehuda makes sense. According to Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Yoshia said that the Einat Fanos Magias L'Schach Machlokes, that Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim argued about a case of a sukkah, which is above Esrim Amma, and the Defanos don't reach all the way up to the top. There is airspace in between the top of the Defanos and the Schach. Therefore, Darko Shal Malko Leishik Sukkah She'en Defanos Magias L'Schach. She's the queen, and it's appropriate for a queen to have airspace coming in, right? Not to make it all cooped up, that the Defanos reach all the way to the Schach and there's no air coming into the Schach. And here we'll take a look at Daf Gimel for a second. Mishum Avira, she wanted Avir. So therefore, it makes sense that since the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham is in a case of a sukkah, she'enat fanos magias l'schach. That's according to Rabbi Yoshi's version of Rav. And Chileni Amalka was sitting in just that kind of sukkah of enat fanos magias l'schach to allow the airspace to come in. Therefore, he has a very good proof, Rabbi Yehuda to the Chachamim, that this sukkah is a sukkah kshera, even though it's l'malam yesrin and enat fanos magias l'schach. According to Rav Huna and Rav Chanan, who argue that the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim about l'malam yesrin is in a sukkah ketana. According to Rav Huna, it means a sukkah that's 4 by 4 amos. According to Rav Chanan, a sukkah that's 7 by 7 tefachim. But in a sukkah gedola, even the Chachamim would machshir the chidarka shal malka leishik b'sukkah ketana. Right? She wants to bring in all her family members and her misharsim, all her attendants and so forth and so on. What, they're going to squeeze it into a sukkah of 7 by 7 tefachim or a sukkah of 4 by 4 amos? There's no doubt that she was sitting in a larger sukkah that was larger than Arba al Arba amos. If that be the case, then how could Rabbi Yehuda bring any proof to support his opinion from the sukkah of Hileni Amalka? That sukkah was a sukkah gedola, and even the Chachamim on Moda, according to Rav Huna and Rav Chanan, in a sukkah gedola, that despite the fact that it's above Esr Mama, it's kshera. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to We're going to stop here on the top of Daf Gimel Amud Al.